Good morning, everyone. We'll give all of our attendees a few minutes before we get started here. So just hang tight and we will get started shortly. We'll give it just one more minute and we'll get started very shortly. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar after the winter storm here at the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce. We are really honored and delighted to be hosting this webinar with our member company, Nextime. As many of you know, Nextime is a multi-service, full-service tax and advisory firm that provides our members and members of the broader business community with a variety of financial and consulting services, from establishing greenfield projects to other financial advisory services. And today we are joined by two distinguished members of the Nextime team to talk about the India tax landscape and opportunities that are available for companies that are interested in doing business with India or working with India or working with Nextime to further their own business opportunities. Today, we're going to be talking about recent updates as it relates to the tax landscape, as well as the union budget for 2021, and some of the key highlights of that budget. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Maulik Joshi. Maulik is a Senior Executive Director of Transfer Pricing and Transaction Advisory Services. He has over 18 years of experience in cross-border tax. He heads the transfer pricing group at Nextime and oversees the transaction advisory services function. He is a chartered accountant by qualification and serves a number of multinational corporations, including technology firms, pharmaceuticals, etc., and also works with, in some cases, entities that are wholly American owned or owned in other countries outside of India on transfer pricing issues that they may be trying to address, including planning and litigation, as well as advanced pricing agreements and contemporaneous documentation studies. Maulik has been recognized as a highly ranked practitioner by Euromoney's transfer pricing group. And he also has extensive experience with cost sharing arrangements and transfers of tangible and intangible property, intercompany services, loans and agreements and guarantees, global dealings, and cross-border restructurings. So Maulik's list of accomplishments and areas of expertise goes on, but I'm going to stop there. And I think some of that will probably come through in his presentation today. And then also joining us, we have Hiren Vora. Hiren is also a chartered accountant with Nextime with expertise in indirect tax advisory, litigation, GST, customs, service tax and VAT, and tax automation. He is also a specialist in litigation and high-end indirect tax advisory. He has over 8 years of experience, including 5 years at one of the largest global consultancy firms. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Maulik Doshi and Hiren Vora, who will talk to us about India's tax landscape and provide us with an overview of the union budget key highlights. Towards the end of this presentation, we will open it up for questions and answers. So please, if you have any questions, save those to the end of the presentation, and then I will help to field those questions. You can include your questions, you can type them out in the chat box at the bottom, as well as the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I will make sure I check both of those at the end of the program. So without further ado, Maulik, it's all yours.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning, everyone. I hope the situation is becoming normal and kind of people are standing back to the feet back down there. In today's presentation, what we are going to cover is some of the developments that are taking place in India on the tax and the tax administration side, and what the changes the government has proposed through the budget of 2021. The Indian tax regime in the last 2 years has undergone a significant change. And there are a lot of areas that were kind of a issue for the foreign investors. And the government has made a really honest and a sincere attempt to address those areas and to try and overcome some of the aspects that were always a challenge for the non-resident or a foreign company that wants to do business in India. So the initial part of the presentation I'm going to deal is kind of trying to talk through what are the changes made by the government, which kind of are making an impact on the foreign companies that are doing businesses in India or that wish to do business in India in the future. And then we talk about a little bit about the changes that are further made by the budget. In terms of India, I don't have to kind of really talk about this. People are aware of it. It's one of the fastest growing economy in the world. The advantage of India lies in its huge consumption market and availability of a huge population, young population, pretty much dynamic and kind of that also adds significantly to the skilled labor force that is available in abundance at a very competitive rates. And if you see an attempt being made by the governments right since 2014, there's a significant increase in the ease of doing business rankings that the World Bank publishes. So we were kind of somewhere towards the bottom of the ease of doing business rankings. And through constant efforts and reforms on a yearly basis, the rankings have improved. And now we are somewhere around 72 in terms of the ease of doing business rankings. And this has constantly been worked upon. And I think there is an endeavor right now also from the government side to see how this can go below 50 and kind of come in the top 50 in terms of the ease of doing bank rankings. At the same time, the government is kind of quite open about the fact that they want to boost the domestic manufacturing. They are kind of looking at all the measures to increase foreign direct investment in the manufacturing part of it. They are providing competitive corporate tax rates, which we are kind of going to discuss in the in the subsequent slides. They are trying to see the tax litigation, which was one of the burning issue in India, is reduced over a period of time, and how the foreign companies get a certainty when they are on tax side when they are dealing with India. So a lot of macro changes that are taking place at an overall government level. One of the major change that I wanted to talk about today is that is on the reduction of corporate tax rate. This reduction was announced somewhere in the mid of 2019, and it in a sense provided an option to the taxpayers, saying that you can opt for the lower new beneficial tax rates, or you can be governed by the old regime or the current regime that was there without getting any benefits of the tax rate, but getting all the other benefits that the taxpayer generally used to get. So right now in India, two parallel tax systems are working, both for corporates as well as for individuals. Talking about corporates, the two parallel tax system is under tax system 1, you are governed by an old tax rate, which is between 25 and 30%, and the effective tax rate can go as high as up to 33 to 34%. But you still get all the additional tax deductions and tax incentives that the government had formulated from time to time. So there was an incentive for companies that are located in special economic zones, the SEZs, where the tax income there was a tax holiday period of 10 years. So people who are the companies who are enjoying those tax exemptions can still opt to govern by the old regime, in which case, while the tax rate as mentioned by the regulation would be somewhere around 30-35%, but the effective tax rate would be lower because they are availing certain exemptions. But at the same time, there were a large significant number of companies, especially new companies, that were not availing those exemptions because those exemptions were over. There was a sunset clause for that. So for new companies and large number of other taxpayers, the government has now announced a new regime of taxation where if you are not a manufacturing company, which means you are a service company or a trading company or some other businesses, you have a tax rate of 22% with all the charges, etc. It would add up to the effective tax rate could go up to 25% itself. So from the 35% tax rate, this has come down to 25%, and you can avail this provided you do not take any of the tax exemption or tax deductions that were available in the past. For manufacturing companies, in order to boost the manufacturing operations, the government has announced a further concession in terms of the tax rates. The government has mentioned that if the companies are set up after 1st of October 2019, and if they commence manufacturing, if they start the manufacturing activity before March of 23, in that case, the effective tax rate would be only 15%, and with adding all the add-ons and surcharges, etc., it would go up to 17% only. So once a company is set up after October 2019 and starts manufacturing before March 23, then they can enjoy this 17% tax rate for their lifetime. It's not a limited period lower tax rate, it's a lifetime lower tax rate that's provided. Here again, the conditions are attached. The conditions are that they cannot avail any additional tax exemptions or tax deductions that generally a normal manufacturing company would generally tend to have in terms of exports or anything. So even if they are based in SEZ, they cannot exempt that if they want to follow under the new tax regime. So some of those conditions like filing tax returns on time and kind of the old tax credits or old brought forward losses cannot be adjusted, needs to be fulfilled if you opt for the newer tax regime. The other aspect, the other catch in the newer tax regime is that once you opt for the new tax regime, then you cannot go back to the old one. So it's a one-time choice that the taxpayer can do. They need not do the choice immediately. They can do it 2 years afterwards, 4 years afterwards, at their will. But once they do the choice of shifting from old to new, then they cannot do the reshifting to the other regime. With this kind of tax rate change, India has become one of the really kind of attractive jurisdictions in terms of the overall reduction of the corporate tax rates. Along with the tax rate change, the other issue that generally kind of was hurting the foreign investor was the dividend taxation regime that India had. India had a very regressive dividend taxation regime where while the shareholder was exempt from tax, the Indian company that was distributing dividend, apart from 35% corporate tax that used to pay, additionally, if they were to distribute dividend, they were to pay 20% dividend distribution tax. And because of this tax where the shareholder was exempt and the company was paying taxes, even if the shareholder was coming from a country like USA, which has a very good tax treaty with India, yet they were not able to take advantage of the tax treaty because anyways they were exempt and the company was paying taxes. So the effective tax rate used to be somewhere around 45–50%, and that was kind of becoming an issue. With effect from 2020, the government has now reformed this dividend taxation regime, where now they have said that the onus of taxation now is on the recipient of the income, which is the shareholder. So if a US company has a subsidiary in India, the US company will pay taxes. The advantage over here is that instead of a 20% dividend distribution tax, the US company can opt for a lower rate of taxes under the tax treaty. The India-US tax treaty provides for 10% over withholding taxes on the dividend. And similarly, there are other tax treaties which have further lower rates. Say, for example, a lot of countries in the European region like Switzerland, etc., have a tax rate of 5%. So they can opt for a 5% or a 10% or a 15% tax rate, and the earlier 20% tax rate that was applicable would not apply. So this is a really beneficial regime. Now, if you compare these two changes, the change in the corporate tax rate vis-a-vis the change in the dividend taxation, and if you put them together, under the old regime, putting dividend distribution tax, the total tax at a shareholder level, foreign shareholder level, was coming to around 48%. So if you make $100 in India, you end up paying $48 at taxes in India, and only you will be able to repatriate $52 back to your shareholder in USA. If you consider only the old regime, where you pass on the benefit of the dividend taxation, so the company still opts to continue for the old regime, then this 48% gets reduced to 41% because of the change in the dividend taxation. But if you opt for the new regime of taxation, where like I mentioned, the top tax rate is 25%, then this 48% straightway reduces to 32%. So that's almost a 1/3 savings in the total taxes that are there. And if you're a manufacturing company fulfilling those conditions set up after 2019 and starting manufacturing before 23, then the 48% tax rate that the foreign shareholder used to pay straightly comes down to 25%. So this is almost half the taxes that you were paying in India if you're manufacturing earlier and kind of distributing dividends. You were ending up paying 48% if you can take the profits back to USA. Now you will only pay 25% and you can take the balance profit to the United States without any further taxes in India. And with the US tax reform, there is no further tax in United States with the foreign dividends being exempt. If you not look at a corporate regime, but if you look at a limited liability partnership, which is very similar to the LLC concept in United States, except that it's not a flow through, it's not a pass through here in India, but any further income after the LLP pays the corporate tax rate, and the LLP corporate tax rate is on a higher side, it's almost 35%. But once the LLP pays its corporate tax of 35%, any further distribution is not taxed, and therefore the total tax in the hands of the shareholder still remains 35%. So if you look at the new regime and the LLP, they are pretty much similar. But if you're looking at a manufacturing company, it's still much more beneficial to have a corporate entity and much more beneficial to kind of go for the new regime and kind of look at a better tax regime. So if you look at this as compared to some of the tax rates that are mentioned in the other countries, and especially if compared to the US tax rates, India has now entered a world map where on the competitive tax rate side, some of the Asian countries like Japan, China, etc. have a higher tax rate than India. So in that sense, India now really offers a really competitive tax advantage, apart from all the other advantages that were there in respect of a jurisdiction like India. And really this has kind of led to a lot of foreign direct investments into India. US is #1 country in terms of the investing into India, and this has really kind of boosted the foreign direct investment, and which was the intent of the government in terms of reducing the tax rates. Some of the other prominent features that one have to understand from an Indian tax law, which are pretty typical to the Indian law, and therefore I kind of bring this out so that it doesn't come as a surprise when you are looking at operations in India, In India, there is a concept of a carry forward of losses up to 8 years. It's not unlimited. And unlike some of the European countries, there is no carryback available. The compliances have been taken very, very seriously in India. And therefore, if on the expense side, if you are incurring an expense, you have to ensure that you do the withholding tax compliances with respect to that expenditure very, very carefully. Because if you are defaulting there, the expense itself gets taxed, not allowed from a tax perspective. Same way, certain statutory payments are only allowed on actual payment basis and not on accrual basis. So if there are dues such as social security contributions, etc., they are allowed only if they are made as a payment to the government, and they are not allowed even if you accrue it for the whole year. The other major change that the budget brought about, and which was a kind of a sea change or really a mindset change from an Indian administration perspective, is the last point on reopening of the assessments. Earlier, the foreign investors always used to get worried that how back can the Indian tax officer go? And the period was they can go back up to 6 years. And in a very rare case, up to 16 years, where they found there was actually a defrauding, a fraud done by the taxpayer on the revenue. Now that timelines have changed, and with effect from 2021, the government, the tax authorities can only go back up to 3 years in a normal scenario. And in case they realize that the company has done a tax fraud, they can go up to 10 years. So this is again a significant change, a mindset change, where the government is ready to consider the fact that they cannot keep the sword hanging on the foreign investors for a long period of time, and they have provided a certainty by providing a period of 3 years for reopening of the cases. If you are dealing with India, and if you are doing businesses with India through your related parties, one of the most important consideration that you need to keep in mind is the transfer pricing regulations. The Indian transfer pricing regulations are based on OECD guidelines. The United States also follows by and large OECD guidelines. So to that extent, there's a lot of similarity. We have a 3-tier documentation, which is again prescribed as per the OECD Action Plan 13 on the BAPS Action Plan side. The key feature, or the important feature of the Indian regulation is that there's an annual update that is statutorily required. So unlike in United States or some of the other European countries where you do a transfer pricing update once in 2 or 3 years, under the Indian law, there's an annual update that is statutorily required. And there's a CPA certification required annually on your intercompany transactions, on the transfer pricing and the arm's length pricing that is being followed. So these two compliances are there on an annual basis, and companies have to do those compliances on an annual basis. So it becomes a compliance exercise for every company, and it's not that they do once in 2 or 3 years. The regulation do provide for advanced pricing agreements, which provides for a certainty for a period of 5 years, and a rollback is also allowed for a period of 4 years. So if you are wanting a certainty with respect to your intercompany transactions and pricing for those intercompany transactions, you can opt for advanced pricing agreements. It can be a unilateral APA with the Indian government, or it can be a bilateral with the Indian government and the US IRS also. And that certainty is being provided at both ends, both from the Indian government as well as from the US IRS. So an APA program has been pretty successful from an Indian perspective. I think one of the best responses across the world this program has received in India. And the timelines are also pre-COVID at least were managed very well. COVID kind of did set us back in terms of the timelines and ability of staff and people kind of filing the details, etc. But pre-COVID, India was one of the top countries in terms of timelines being followed to conclude an advanced pricing agreement. So again, it's a good program by the government, encourages the taxpayer to come forth and achieve a certainty with respect to their intercompany transactions. And same way for small taxpayers, there's a safe harbor provided, where if they operate in a particular industry, say IT enabled, BPO, shared services, etc., they can declare a minimum operating profit that the government prescribes on a year-to-year basis. And if they follow that minimum operating profit, then there are no further questions asked. There is a certainty, and the tax officer will not question the intercompany pricing and the intercompany transactions that are there. So even safe harbor are available, but they are only for small taxpayers below a particular threshold. In India, if looking at setting up a new business in India, There are 3 or 4 things that are critical and one needs to keep in mind. It's not a straight entry option. It's not that you set up a company in 2 days and the company is up and running, etc. One has to really apply their mind, because the tax structures, once they are formed, they are irreversible in some sense, or there's a high cost of reversing the tax structures. And therefore, it is really important that you plan your activity in India well before you are coming to India. The choice of entry vehicle in terms of what kind of entity you want to select, whether it should be a corporate entity, whether it should be a limited liability partnership, where I explained the tax advantage was there, whether it should be a branch office or a rep office. One has to really consider, because each and every type has a different nuance and has a different requirement. A rep office by and large can be only used for a kind of a postman's activity, a communication channel, and cannot do any commercial activity. The corporate entity company can kind of attract all foreign direct investments and can do unlimited number of activity. A branch office again would have a limited play. They cannot do any manufacturing activity as such. The limited liability partnership also has a commercial limitation in terms of whether, especially if you're bidding for government projects or kind of some large tender documents, etc., they generally don't recognize a limited liability partnership. So one is to really consider their business model in India and accordingly choose the entry vehicle. Apart from the entry vehicle, the jurisdiction through which you come and the shareholder that you form also becomes important. So if you say, for example, the India and US is one of the good tax treaties, but Mauritius, Singapore, the other cities which are also very good. Netherlands in Europe is also a very good tax treaty with India. So looking at the objective and the timing of the investments, one can also consider whether you should invest directly from US to India, or maybe through Netherlands, or maybe through Singapore or Mauritius. The second aspect to be considered is on the funding side, how we wish to set up the Indian funding, whether it should be equity, preference shares, some of the convertible instruments, or foreign debt. One thing you need to bear in mind is that foreign debt is not easy. There is a process to be followed. There are limitations around the foreign debt, and not all the entire funding can be done through foreign debt. Also, there are interest limitation deductions similar to United States. There are restrictions on how much interest you can deduct when you are looking at a foreign debt here. So one has to really take into consideration. I have seen many companies that they say, okay, we put the bare minimum equity capital and all the other funding would be done by a debt from a parent company. That generally is not feasible, and one has to really look at how the funding options can be devised. And the last thing that to be considered is the business model that you're going to operate. Are you a full-fledged manufacturing company here in India? Are you going to do a trading company? If you're a trading company, would you be more of a limited risk distributor or a full-fledged distributor? Or are you a back office service provider or a marketing entity or a commission entity? So what kind of trading, what kind of model you are going to operate in India? What's the modus operandi of reaching to your end customer? That needs to be decided in advance, and accordingly, based on the modus operandi, the pricing, the intercompany transactions get kind of designed, and the pricing policy for the same gets designed. So again, this is very important because we realize that many companies start off with a trading model, then they realize that they are making losses in India and they wanted funding, but the funding then becomes difficult. So they say that, okay, can we go on to passing some commission income? So all of this becomes very important when you are looking at India as a operations, and a proper planning will help you kind of avoid any other future risk and future challenges that would come up. Looking at repatriation, like I mentioned, the dividend route of repatriation has become really easy with the the dividend distribution tax being abolished, and now the tax treaty rate coming into picture for the withholding taxes. So most companies now prefer dividend to repatriate the funds back. But otherwise also you have payment for services, management charges, technical services, royalty payments as the payments. The only thing one needs to consider when you're looking at management fee or royalties is that these are extremely litigative from a transfer pricing perspective. The Indian tax authorities view these payments as more like a profit extraction tools, and therefore they question that thoroughly, and therefore they have to be complying with the arm's length standard, and they have to comply with all the transfer pricing norms and documentation that are attached to both these payments. So if you're looking at a payment for royalty or payment for any services back to the US parent, you need to ensure that you have the right transfer pricing documentation in place that can be justified to make these payments. The buyback of shares and capital reductions are two other methods, but which are sparingly used. They are again not they are tax efficient, not extremely kind of tax costly, but they involve a process with the company secretarial and company law process, and therefore they are sparingly used. The most important change, I would say, in the entire thought process of the Indian tax administration that has come in the last 3 to 4 years. Since 2016, we have been seeing this more and more. And the focus of the government, I think the single point agenda of the government has been to reduce the tax litigation. One of the most important fact that the government acknowledged was that the government itself is the major litigator. And even if the taxpayer wins the case at a particular forum, they further litigate that. So having accepted that, they now made a change where if the tax authorities have to file an appeal on a case where the taxpayer has already won, the monetary limits for filing those appeals are enhanced almost 20 to 50 times. So it's not a small change, almost a 10 times and to 20 times the monetary limits are enhanced. So basically all the small and mid-sized taxpayers who kind of have maybe 50 people, 100 people operations, and the tax demands are not significant, they really don't go into a significant litigation change. The other was the introduction of Vivad se Vishwas scheme, which was a kind of a dispute resolution scheme that the government brought in a limited time. The last date is 28th of February, end of this month, where if you have past litigation pending with the government and you want to opt for the resolving that litigation, you agree to pay all the taxes, and the interest and the penalties that are there, that gets kind of waived off. So to that extent, there is a relief to the taxpayer, and people and many companies, in fact, a large number of US companies did opt for this Vivad se Vishwas scheme because they just wanted to get the monkey off their back. They really didn't kind of really wanted to litigate. It was more of the fear of penalties and higher interest demands that they were pursuing a litigation. And then since the government gave this opportunity for them, they kind of really took advantage of that opportunity. And that was one area where almost 20 to 22% of the litigation that was there is reduced because of the Vivad se Vishwas scheme. The reduction in the timelines for reassessment I spoke about when they reduced this from 6 years to 3 years. The other change that they have brought about is on the faceless assessments and faceless appeals. Earlier, if there's a tax assessment that used to take place, I used to visit the tax office. The tax officer used to sit across the table and I used to explain him how the transactions happen, what are the tax deductions that I have claimed, how my tax return is filed, etc. Now, the problem was that with the tax administration being so revenue biased, it was very difficult, and there was a lot of harassment being seen at a lower level tax office. And that was creating an issue for foreign companies that were dealing with India. Under the faceless assessment, there is no human interaction. In fact, it's a dynamic jurisdiction. So literally when it happens all over the government tax portal, you really don't have to visit a tax office. The government tax portal will display a tax notice that is there and you file your tax response to that. It is assigned to a tax officer. You don't know which tax officer it gets assigned to. The tax officer is not supposed to contact you. The tax officer is supposed to read all the submissions that you've given and accordingly pass an order. So this really achieves the efficiency, provides transparency and accountability from the tax officer's perspective. The government is in a big way using technology and artificial intelligence to really take out cases which deserve a greater scrutiny and not kind of pick up every other case for the purpose of this thing. And since there's no human interaction, it's a team-based working, is a functional specialization is coming, it's become really, really helpful. The other programs are on the dispute resolution side where the governments are doing for small and large taxpayers. I spoke about the APA program, and similarly, there's an advanced rulings program, which has now made very speedy. And on account of COVID, the government had provided certain relaxations on the timelines and certain late payments, etc. The one question that comes up is that if you are doing business with India, do I have to file a tax return? If I'm earning royalty, if I'm earning interest, or if I'm earning any Indian sourced income, do I have to file a tax return? Here, the government also provided a relaxation that if the foreign company is earning income from India, and if the withholding tax is done as per the Indian income tax law, then the foreign company need not file a tax return. But if the withholding tax is done as per the US-India tax treaty, then the foreign company will still have to file a tax return because the tax officer has to get an opportunity to examine whether the claim for the foreign company of the tax treaty is right claim or not. And therefore, they say that you submit a tax return, and based on the submission of the tax return, we examine if the claim is right, the return gets processed without any further tax demand. But if they found anything to be further investigated, they can investigate it. The multilateral instrument really is not changing anything with India, United States. So I will skip that because the US is not a part of BAPS project, and therefore the India-US tax treaty does not get changed because of the multilateral instrument. This is a critical change for a large number of US companies, which is the India's version of digital taxation. The US government has kind of gone to the WTO and complained against the levy that the India has brought in. India brought in this levy in 3 parts in 2016, in 2020, and expanded it in 2021. The 2020 levy was introduced mainly on non-resident e-commerce operator. So if a foreign company is doing some e-commerce business with India, if they are providing online sale of goods, if they are doing online provision of services, or if there is a sale of advertisement or sale of data that is there, then in those cases, the foreign company has to pay a 2% equalization levy, or India's version of the digital services tax, or India's digital tax, and the foreign company will have to discharge this by filing a tax return and paying taxes in India. There is no compliance on the Indian resident payer. It is mainly the foreign company that has to do this. So this is a significant change that brought about in 20, and now further expanded in 21, because what was online sale of goods and what was online provision of services is something which was very, very difficult to understand. Now the government has given a clarification that any process with respect to online sale of goods or provision of services that takes place online, which is either acceptance of offer or placing the purchase order or payment for a consideration, if any one of this process takes place online, then it will be regarded as an online sale of goods, and the foreign company will be subject to a 2% equalization levy. Now, this is again has opened up a lot of unintended transactions that are getting covered. A US company selling goods to an Indian subsidiary, where the orders are placed over the ERP, over the accounting package, over SAP, that kind of is a question mark, because in that sense, it's an online sale of goods. Or the payment of consideration takes place online. That's also online sale of goods. And these transactions which were not brought to tax earlier could now fall under that tax. There are a lot of representations being filed with the Indian government, and the government has assured that they will come out with a lot of clarifications. So until the clarification comes, this is the law, but we all await the clarification that would come with respect to this. This is one aspect which, if you're doing any business with India, forget doing business in India, any business with India, every US company needs to take care whether they are falling within the limits and within the purview of equalization levy. And if yes, they need to discharge their compliance and tax burden with respect to that. This is one thing which I would urge every US company to check before doing any transactions with India. So this was what I wanted to cover in today's presentation. The subsequent slides on tax incentives are really not really anything major. Essentially, they are mainly on the financial services sector, where they have provided certain incentives to the International Financial Services Center that is being set up in India, in the GIFT City in Gujarat, and proposed a future proposed one in Mumbai. And there are certain relaxations being given to the sovereign wealth funds, etc., that are investing in New India. But they are very specific with a lot of conditions attached, not really in the general parlance of doing businesses. And therefore, I will not go into the detail of it. So this brings me to an end of my presentation. Like we mentioned, we'll take up the question answer sessions later on once Hiren presents the indirect tax portion or GST portion, and then we can take up the question answer session. So thank you so much, and over to Hiren for your presentation on the indirect tax side.
Yes. Thanks, Maulik. It was a beautiful presentation and really good description. So, good morning, everyone. I would like to start my discussion on the indirect tax front with a point where Maulik had left. So, if you see, the ease of doing business ranking for India had changed similar, very on a very high scale in the year 2017 and year 2018. One of the reasons for the same was the introduction of goods and services tax in India. So prior to July 2017, India had an indirect tax net of thousands of different taxes. Now there were different taxes for charging of services, different taxes for sales, different taxes for production, and every state had its own different tax as well. So there were contrasting provisions and which used to give rise to number of litigations. To do away with all those things, in July 2017, the Indian government had introduced GST, which is goods and services taxes. So GST is nothing but a levy of taxes on supply of goods. Now it is subsuming various taxes like excise, service tax, state-wise VATs, and central sales tax, which were the legacy laws continuing in India prior to GST. And the laws which I just mentioned still do continue, but only for petroleum products and alcohol for human consumption. Now, even these goods are proposed to be covered within the ambit of GST soon, but still there are negotiations going on few of the aspects which are yet unclear for the suppliers and the states. Again, GST is a federal structure based tax. So there is a different levy on center and a different levy for the states. So the tax which goes to the center is called central GST, and the tax which goes to the state is called state GST. Again, if there is a supply of goods from one state to another state, the levy will be named or termed as integrated GST, and the same will be broken down into center and state at the central level, and then be accordingly passed to each and every state where the goods and services are supposed to be consumed. So this brings me to the point that GST is a consumption-based tax. The state in which or the location at which the goods or services are getting consumed is the location which earns the money of the tax from the GST. And there are predefined rates notified by the tax authorities, which range from 0% to 28%. And there are 5 slab rates in all: 0, 5, 12, 18, and 28. Based on the description of goods, which is a 4-digit HSN based description, the goods are taxed, and there are few of the exemption notifications. If the suppliers fall into that, they'll be eligible to claim lower rate of duties under GST as well. Now, even imports from outside India do attract GST, and any goods which are supplied outside India are typically termed as zero rated. There are various means and mechanisms, but the ultimate summation of this would be that the exports are typically not charged. You will be getting refund by one way or the other. Coming to a structure of compliances under indirect taxation. So GST registration has to be obtained from the state in which the supplier wants to run his business. So it could be 10 different places or throughout throughout India, wide various states, and registration has to be obtained in each and every state. Once registration has been obtained, the supplier has to file monthly returns under the law. And there are various types of returns, like a return for outward supplies, a return for net tax payments, wherein one of the critical aspects is the reconciliation. So as the saying goes, one man's income is another man's expenses. So under the GST law, what the Indian government is planning to do is they want to merge or correlate every expense to the income which is disclosed under the rules. So once you file a return for the outward taxes, the same gets generated to your supplier's inward side, and basis that the supplier has to match these inward details with the purchase register in which he has recorded all the inward transactions. Only and only when he is able to match these transactions, he'll be able to claim inward tax credit, which is a set of mechanism which is allowed against the outward tax which has to be paid by the supplier. And along with that, while there are monthly and quarterly returns, there are also annual returns, which are nothing but a summation of all the monthly returns. In addition to annual return, there is a policy of annual audit, which has to be undertaken by a professional for such suppliers whose annual turnover crosses a specific threshold. Currently, the threshold has been termed to be 5 crores. But in the latest budget, again with the concept of ease of doing business, the proposal is out that the requirement for audit by a professional will go away with, and only a self-certified reconciliation statement wherein the transactions as per signed financial statements and the transactions which have been submitted in the monthly GST returns have to be matched. Along with that, there are two other concepts which I want to touch upon under GST. One is e-way bill. So any movement of goods within India or outside India has to be under the cover of a e-way bill. So while invoices have to be raised for any supplies, along with invoices for movement specifically, e-way bills have to be raised. If there are no e-way bills to your supplies, then your goods could be stopped, halted at any of the checkposts in India, and the goods could be detained, and the goods could also be considered to be fraudulent supplies. So that is a very important document. It is generated on the electronic portal. And along with that, recently there is a concept of e-invoicing which has come under the law. So here what the government intends to do, any invoice that has been raised from the system of the supplier or the taxpayers has to be submitted immediately on the government portal. The government will run a couple of checks like correctness of the invoice number, invoice date, etc. And also it will ensure that these details are circulated to the person on whom this invoice is raised. So ultimately, it will help in the second point which we discussed, which is the reconciliation of inward and outward supplies. So again, this is a step forward in the process of ease of doing business and going digital. Coming to customs, so customs is a law where all the imports are taxed. Any import of goods into India would attract customs duty. Broadly, there are three types of components of this custom duty. One is the basic custom duty, which is applicable on the CIF value of goods being imported, and the rates are notified via 8-digit HSN classifications. Post that, there is a social welfare surcharge, which is applicable on the BCD value, and typically it is 10% of the BCD value. The third component is the integrated GST, which is one of the components of customs duty. While the first two components are a cost to the importer, the third component, that is the integrated goods and service tax, is allowable as a set-off against any other outward tax liabilities. In addition to that, there are various safeguard measures which have been put by the Indian government to protect the interest of the local suppliers. So in case if there are any specific products which are getting dumped into India, or the import of which is being done at a very cheap rate, or could be any other safeguard measures, the three duties which are appearing on the screen, that is countervailing duty, anti-dumping duty, or safeguard duty, could be applicable. Now, for applying these duties, there has to be a proper investigation to be done, and they cannot be applied blanketly for all goods and services. There are notified or regulated goods which are imported from specific countries or from specific exporters, or for the specific product range. Only and only after an investigation you can apply these duties on the goods being imported. In addition to that, I would want to touch upon an aspect of exemption or concessions which are available under the customs. So say for example, there are products on which the customs duty is 10%. However, there are notifications which say that if this product has been imported for the purpose of say solar manufacturing facilities, then the rate would be 5%. Or if they are being imported for the purpose of infrastructure projects, then the rate would be 0%. So there are various concessional and non-concessional notifications, wherein conditional and non-conditional notifications, wherein concessional rate of duty or exemptions have been provided. Also, there are various foreign trade agreements with number of countries, basis which additional benefits can be obtained by way of concessional rates and exemptions. The imports, there are specific valuation rules for imports and exports, and why these rules, one important aspect is the special valuation branch. So suppose there is an Indian entity who is procuring goods from a related or an associated foreign enterprise. In this case, there are chances that the relationship between the parties could affect adversely the price of the imports. So just to check or keep a tab on this, the imports, when they are done for the first time from any related party, are routed through a special valuation branch. It is a different unit of the customs who ask for additional details from the importer in India. The details typically range like who is the importer, what is the how is he related, and many other questions. And the importer has to answer all these questions to the satisfaction of the officer who is underdoing this investigation. If the officer is satisfied, he'll issue a plain report, investigation report, and the importer can procure goods at the rate which have been determined under the customs and at the value which has been determined on the invoice. However, if the if the officer is of a view that the relationship has affected the price, he might ask the importer to increase the value of imports on which the duty has to be paid. This entire process is really time consuming and at times can go into number of years as well. So, it involves frequent interactions with the tax authorities also. And to some extent, while we promote the ease of doing business in India, when it comes to going and visiting the tax offices, it is always not a very pleasant scenario. Another important point here from a importer and exporter perspective as a beneficial point is that the Indian government has come up with a program of accredited economic operations, which has been launched in 2016. Any person who wants to get various benefits under this scheme has to make an application to the tax authorities and submit various documents. And if the documents have been submitted to the satisfaction of the officer, the person or the applicant gets various benefits such as quicker resolution of disputes, fast track procurement or fast track release of goods from the customs port, and paperless communications. Declarations would be done online, and disbursal of refunds would also be quicker as compared to others. Another point which has come up in the last or the 2020 budget is in relation to some custom administration rules. So these rules are pertain to the origin of the goods. Now there, as I was earlier referring to, there are various foreign trade agreements which provide that if procurements are made from any entity from any countries with whom we have a tax treaty, with whom India has a tax treaty. In such cases, if the goods have been originated in those countries, there would be a tax exemption or concessional rate of duty. Due to this, what was happening is the number of imports were happening in a unpleasant manner. While the actual origin was of some other country, it was named with a country with whom India had a tax treaty. So it was ultimately a loss for the Indian government, while the tax treaty was not really being used in the manner it was proposed to be. To keep a check on that, additional powers have been given to the officers who are at the customs port and who are clearing the goods. If they really feel a requirement to investigate whether any goods which have been procured under concessional duty, under any foreign trade agreements, they are at their liberty to ask additional details regarding the origin of these goods to the importer. Until and unless the importer is giving all the details required and all the documents to the satisfaction of the tax authorities, the concessional benefit would be kept in abeyance, and the importer will be allowed to import these goods, but at normal rate of duty, like any other importer or like import from any other country. So this is a very critical aspect, and if found guilty, the benefit for that particular importer could be banned for 5 years. So as an important point here to be noted is any importer who is procuring goods under FTA has to be very mindful of the exporter from whom he is procuring these goods, and he should be in advance ready with all the information details that might be required to prove the genuinity of these origin goods. This brings to the next part of our discussion, which is in relation to various foreign trade policies and benefits that are being allowed by the Indian government. So in India, foreign trade policies typically are given for a period of 5 years. The current policy, which had been initiated in 2015, was actually meant to be continued up to 2020. However, due to the national pandemic, it has been postponed. The end date has been postponed to 31st March 2021. So actual or the overall focus of these foreign trade policies are allowing hassle-free transactions to any importer and exporter in India. So as to promote foreign trade and establish foreign relations, or to strengthen the foreign relations into India. Also, another objective here is improving India's share in the overall existing markets and products. And with that, it would also help Indian players to explore new markets and new territories, unclaimed territories, uncharted territories. Also, there are various other benefits under GST which are being allowed under foreign trade policies. And ultimate objective of all these things is improving the ease of doing cross-border transactions. Few of the key foreign trade policies have been mentioned over here. Couple of them I'll just take in detail. One is advance authorization, in which any importer in India who is going to export goods using any imported goods will be allowed to import goods at zero rated duty. There are various procedures to be followed, and some level of export obligation which has to be met. If that is done, any goods can be procured without any duty being paid at the time of imports. Similarly, while the advance authorization scheme is for procuring inputs or raw materials, there is another scheme which is called export promotion of capital goods, which is for procuring capital goods into India with the same concept of zero rated or nil rated customs duty. The obligation here is a bit severe. It is 6 times the amount of duty which is saved, which has to be fulfilled in a period of 6 years from the procurement of goods into India. Post fulfilling of export obligation, the importer in India of these goods is at a liberty to use these goods for any other purposes. However, until this export obligation is fulfilled, he is bound to use these capital goods only for the purpose of exports. Then there are a couple of other schemes like SEIS, which is Service Export from India scheme, and Merchandise Export from India scheme. So these are the schemes where you export services or goods from India. Then you get certain duty credit scripts, which you can use for the purpose of paying any customs duty. And these scripts are even transferable to any third party who wants to use these scripts to procure any capital goods or any other import materials. There was a dispute for the MEIS and SEIS scheme, which has been raised at the global levels, and these schemes were considered to be non-compliant with the World WTO rules and guidelines. To do away with that, India has now come up with a new scheme called as remission of duties and taxes on export products. So this scheme will not be directly based on exports. However, it will remit the duties which have at different point in time been a part of the export goods. So as a principle, you can never export any taxes. Now there are number of taxes in India, like one of the examples is electricity duty. Another example is stamp duty, which you can never set off against any other outward taxes. So these taxes form an inherent part of your export pricing, due to which the export pricing is actually inflated, and in indirect senses, taxes are also being exported. So to do away with, what the authorities have done is they have come up with a scheme that all these duties, which are forming an inherent part of your export duties, will be allowed to you in the form of duty credit script, similar to what was being given in MEIS scheme. So this scheme is considered to be in lines with the WTO guidelines, and shouldn't be a problem in the long term. Again, changes are being made with an intent to be one with the world, and also to promote trade from India and the ultimate objective of ease of doing business in India. Coming to the last part of the discussion from indirect tax is there are various product linked incentive schemes which have been announced by the tax authorities in the light of the pandemic in a few months back. Now, earlier, these schemes were only issued for a couple of sectors. However, subsequently, various more sectors have been added, such as pharma, telecom equipment, cell battery, textile, etc. And various incentives, various cash incentives are being planned to be given to any setups, any new setups, or any new setup from an existing entity into India. So it could be an MNC who has never seen India from a manufacturing perspective, or it could be an existing entity who wants to explore new products into India and new segments from India. As I said, the incentives would be directly in the form of cash for a period of 5 to 7 years. Typical benefit which the Indian manufacturers are expressing over here is 5 to 10% of the manufacturing total turnover from the manufacturing of new products. So again, the key objective here is to reduce India's dependence on any other countries. So the key term used here is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar means self-reliant, which is a term which our Prime Minister has been using in the wake of pandemic, and even the manufacturers in India have now been inclined to this overall objective in terms of the development. So that's it from an indirect tax perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maulik and Hiren. We can now go to questions. I think some of our attendees may have had to drop off at 10 o'clock, but we have one question from Dr. Ramesh Agarwal. His question is, what would be like income tax implications in India for a private limited company incorporated in India if it is taken over or merged or acquired by a US-based enterprise?
Right. So Neil, I'll take that up. The words kind of taken over, merged, acquired would have a different connotation from an Indian tax perspective. What by and large happens in a scenario that Dr. Agarwal described is basically the US company, company would buy on the shares from the existing shareholders of the Indian private limited company. So the tax implication would be by and large in the hands of the shareholder who are selling the shares from the Indian private limited company, nothing as such on the US enterprise. The merger technically doesn't happen. What happens is instead of the Indian promoters holding shares of the Indian company, now it will be held by US promoters and US based enterprises. So that's how the share acquisition would happen. That's how the acquisition would happen. And the tax implication, if at all, is in the hands of the erstwhile shareholders, the erstwhile promoters, and they will have to pay taxes, the capital gains tax in India. The capital gains rate tax for an unlisted company is generally 20% if it's a long-term capital gain for shares being held for more than 2 years. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Thank you, Maulik. We also had a couple of questions that came in before the program. Maulik, do you want to address those?
In fact, Neil, this was the same question that had come in before the program.
Okay, great.
That got addressed.
I think we've got another question. Oh, he said thank you. Okay. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. Anyone, if you have questions, please go ahead and type it into the chat. If we can go ahead and address those. I know there was a lot of information presented today, so a lot for companies to digest here. Maulik, if you could, if you wouldn't mind, if you and Hiran would add your contact information into the chat box, I think that would be great, or the contact information for who companies can reach out to at Nextime in order to connect with you if they have further questions about this, or if they want to retain your services to support their growth either in India or here.
Sure, I'll do that, Neil.
Great, thank you. It looks like we had more than half of our participants drop off around 10 o'clock. So I think what we'll do is we'll provide a link to this webinar in our newsletter, and then if anybody has additional questions, they can send those to us, and then what we can do is we can send the questions over to you, Maulik, and get those answered if we have any additional questions at that time.
Sure. I'll just put down my contact details on the chat box. So if anyone needs any question, can kind of write to me directly.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I will also include our chamber's email address here, and you can send questions directly to Jugal or Maulik, or you can send questions to the chamber at info@usicoc.org, and we will get those over to Nextime and get those questions answered for you. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I think we're supposed to have another round of not so great weather today, so stay safe, stay warm, and we will connect with you during our next program. Thank you, Maulik, and thank you, Hiran, for taking the time to be with us this evening for you, morning for us. And Jugal, thank you, and to the Nextime team for helping to organize this webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.